Why do you think God gave us the ability or the capacity for fear? Because it's such an unpleasant emotion. We kind of wonder, why did God give us that? Well, it was so that we would avoid danger or injury. It was for the survival of our species. So, in fact, God gave us fear to keep us alive. But Satan has used that capacity to hurt us very deeply, because he's instilled in us the second greatest fear that humans have. The first most fear is fear of death, to keep us safe, but he's instilled in us the second most powerful fear that we have, and that is the fear of vulnerability. And the fear of vulnerability is the fear of exposure. It's the fear that all of our inner loser self, all of our flaws will be exposed, and when people see how flawed we are, we will be rejected and our relationships will fall apart. See, Satan has so convinced us that we're losers and we're defective and we're not as good as other people. And he has so instilled that in us so that we feel like losers and that we're always afraid of anyone finding out what we're really like. And so he wants us to always look inside and say, whoa, what an awful person you are. Now, some of you are thinking that I personally don't have any of these fears of vulnerability. My goodness, I put out a 5-minute video every week with my opinions on things. And so you're saying, well, I'm exposing myself to criticism and vulnerability. Well, it's not really quite that simple. You see, I send the video to you by email. That way I protect myself from your reaction to the video. So I'm not sitting there beside you looking at the look, seeing the look on your face when you open the video, because you just might say, well, that was a complete waste of time. I would have spent those 5 minutes better playing Candy Crush. So no, I just assume that you sit by your computer every week waiting for my email to arrive, and you click on it saying, this was absolutely life-changing. I've got to tell all my friends about it. So you see, I do protect myself from vulnerability. Now, this feeling of vulnerability is so uncomfortable and so unpleasant, and we all have it, because I'm sure every single one of you at some point in your life felt like a loser. Now, come on, admit it, you have. It is so unpleasant, we will do anything to avoid it. And the two most common ways that we try to avoid the feeling of vulnerability is, the first thing we do is we wear masks. In other words, we put a front on, a false front of what we think other people want to see, to give us an acceptability. So we hide all our flaws, and we become like chameleons. We'll be whatever you want us to be so that you will accept us. The second way we deal with to try to avoid the pain of vulnerability is we build walls between ourselves and other people so they can't see behind our masks, and they can't see what we're really like, and they can't see all our defectiveness. And so we build walls, and so that could be by just withdrawing, or it could be by being intimidating and pushing people away. And another way we try to deal with vulnerability is by being controllers, because we think if we can control our environment, if we can control people, we can control events, then we won't be threatened and we won't be feeling vulnerable. But all of these methods, of course, don't work, because you still feel that inner vulnerability and you still feel like a loser inside. These are all defense mechanisms that we all use, but they don't work. But now let's look at the life of Jesus. He was human. Did he have a fear of vulnerability? Well, no. He became so vulnerable. He became vulnerable to emotions. He laughed, he cried, he mourned, he celebrated. He became vulnerable to disappointment. I mean, his own people rejected him. His own disciple that he personally picked betrayed him. And then, of course, he made himself vulnerable to being executed as an innocent man. So why was it that Jesus didn't have that fear of vulnerability, but we all have it? It was because of his relationship with his Father. His Father was continuously telling him how worthy he was, telling him who he was, filling him with love and affirmation. Remember, at his baptism, his Father said, "This is my Son, and I am so pleased with him." So he had this continuous flow of love from his Father that overflowed to us, to all the people he ministered to. So he wasn't afraid of exposure, because he just said, "This is who I am, and I am here to love you out of the overflow from my Father." And did you know that we can have the same relationship with God that Jesus had? That because of the cross, he has opened the door that we can have that continuous flow of love from the Father, that the Father can tell you who you are today. He can fill you with love and affirmation, because your Father, your Heavenly Father, thinks you're amazing. And he doesn't want you to focus on your flaws. He wants to focus on who he is making you to be. So when this video is done, I want you to actually ask God, ask Jesus, who do you say I am? How do you feel about me? How do you feel about all my flaws and my weaknesses? I feel like a loser, but who do you say I am? Because your true self is who Jesus says you are. So you don't have to have a mask anymore. You don't have to be a controller to try to control everything. You don't need walls anymore. You can just be yourself, because every time you look inside, instead of saying, I'm such a loser, you look inside and say, there's Jesus shining out through my chest. So today, you can stop feeling the fear of vulnerability. Now I want to hear from you. How have you dealt with the fear of vulnerability? How have you dealt with the feeling of being a loser? Just leave your testimony in the box below this video, because it will be an encouragement to someone else. And if this is your first visit here, you need to get my free self-assessment guide. And to do that, just subscribe to my weekly email newsletter by clicking on the link below this video. Join the transformation movement. And I'll talk to you again next week. But this week, get rid of your masks. You don't have to control anything.